Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar. The time has come, Freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. My name is Sarah Hathaway. I'm a union organiser in the health sector and a member of Socialist Alliance. This webinar has been organised by the Free Öcalan campaign in Australia, whose participants include Australians for Kurdistan, Rojava Solidarity Sydney, the Solidarity with Rojava Network in WA, and the Federation of Democratic Kurdish Society Australia. And before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on stolen land. For myself, I'm meeting on Wadawurrung country, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We'd like to acknowledge the support of the international initiative Freedom for Abdullah Öcalan Peace in Kurdistan, especially with arranging our two special international guest speakers, Clare Baker and Ögmundur Jonasson. And I'll say more about our speakers in a minute. Just some housekeeping, we should have some time for questions tonight. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the comment box in the live YouTube. And before we hear from our speakers, we're just going to cross to a 2-minute video clip about some of the actions of the Free Öcalan campaign that have been held around Australia over the last few months. So we'll get Alex to play that video. Great, thanks Alex. A great video of just some of the actions that have happened around Australia. So our first speaker tonight is John Tully. John is a historian and writer living in Tasmania. He retired from Melbourne's Victoria University, where he taught history and political science in 2015. He maintains his affiliation with the university as an honorary professor and is a member of the National Tertiary Education Union. He was an anti-war activist during his student days and later campaigned against apartheid and the Indonesian occupation of East Timor. He was a founding member of Australians for Kurdistan, which was set up at the time of the siege of Kobani. So, John, thanks for joining us, and we'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks to everyone for organising this forum. And I should add, I suppose, also that I endorse your comments about standing on stolen land. And the point I'd make there too is that there is a similarity there in a lot of ways between the dispossession of the Aboriginal peoples of this country and the dispossession of the Kurdish people. So thank you very much. The Turkish Republic, I would argue, was set up as a prison house of nations, particularly for the Kurdish people. And Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or the PKK, is a living symbol of resistance to the oppression and injustice against the Kurdish people. And also, if there's to be any progress whatsoever towards a lasting peace, and a lasting and just peace, based on democracy, mutual respect and equality in all spheres, he must be released from prison. And the negotiations, which were broken off by the Turkish government back in 2015, must be restarted. Otherwise, the war will be endless and the suffering will be enormous. Since the 1920s, or since the inception of the Turkish Republic back in 1923, various Turkish governments, I would argue, have continued the genocidal politics and ideology of the Young Turks. And people remember that at the time of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire in its dying days committed genocide against the Armenian people, the Assyrian people, and also against the Pontic Greek population. And things didn't change after that. Instead of the Armenians being on the receiving end of this genocidal injustice, the Kurds became the victims of that. One of the first acts of the new republic back in 1923, the new Turkish Republic, was to ban the Kurdish language. The grand plan of the new government, and this has been continued right throughout with some ebbs and flows, has been a grand plan of forcible assimilation of the Kurdish population. And those who resisted were basically facing death. And the aim always has been for an ethnically pure Turkish state. This meant eradicating the Kurdish language and culture, insisting from the 1930s, for instance, that the Kurds were nothing but mountain Turks. The Kurds, however, are not Turks. They're proudly, stubbornly attached to their customs and language. Successive generations for the past 100 years have resisted the Turkish state, sometimes by armed struggle, and where possible, via democratic windows of opportunity. The People's Democratic Party, I should say, the HDP, was set up in 2012, and it has sought to use peaceful means to get justice for the Kurdish people. Unfortunately, that window is being closed by the Erdogan government. I would argue too, against what we're commonly told, that the PKK's armed struggle is not terrorism. I'd say that all peoples, when all else fails, have the right to resist oppression by force of arms. I'd like to be a pacifist myself, but I'm sure that the Kurdish people would like to be pacifists too. But when you're faced with a state armed to the teeth, determined to stop you being Kurdish, then armed struggle may be the only solution. And I think we have to ask, why is it that the leaders of the United States, for instance, the country that won its independence by armed struggle back in 1776, deny the Kurds the right to struggle and claim that their struggle is terrorism? And this country, Australia, has the Kurds on the terror list. There are 25 organisations on the Australian government terror list, and 24 of them well deserve to be on it. They're violent Islamist groups, such as ISIS, Jamaat Islamiyah, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, etc. And these are organisations which target civilians around the world, which have no compunction ethically at all about killing innocent people. It's also interesting that the Kurds gave their blood and are still giving their blood against these people in Syria today. The PKK anomaly, being the one organisation, a secular organisation on the terrorist list in this country, stems back to 2005. And the reason for them being put on the list was that the then Turkish Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, came along and he demanded, he came to Australia as a guest of the Australian government, and he demanded that the Australian government list the PKK as terrorist. And of course, Mr. Howard jumped to that, and it's been on the terror list ever since. And we've been working very hard and will continue to work very hard to have it taken off that terror list, because the PKK poses absolutely no threat whatsoever to the lives and well-being of the people of this country or any of the other countries which have banned it. It's basically down to realpolitik, so-called realist politics, that Turkey's a member of NATO, that via a web of alliances, somehow we end up on the same side as someone like Mr. Erdogan. Last year, there was a ray of sunshine, or something intelligent was done as far as the PKK. Belgium's highest court, that was the Court of Cassation, that's the equivalent of the High Court in this country, upheld a ruling of the Brussels Court of Appeal that the PKK cannot be classified as a terrorist organisation. And the reason that they gave for that, and the Australian government should listen to this, and all the governments around the world which have listed the PKK as terrorist, is that the PKK is, quote, a party in a non-international armed conflict or civil war where the use of legitimate military force is allowed. So, as I say, this is the highest court in Belgium. It's the equivalent of the Supreme Court of the United States, the equivalent of the High Court of Australia. Alas, the Belgian government did not support that, and they defied the ruling of the court. And this fits with a long and sad history by which we've seen the governments of the world turning a blind eye to the Turkish state's violence, and worse, supporting successive Turkish governments in terms of trade, diplomacy, and the supply of weapons of mass destruction to that state. So the Turkish state, in terms of the Middle East, is a superpower. It's the most, it's armed to the teeth. It's armed to the teeth with German Leopard tanks, American and UK military aviation, and Australia recently has been supplying military drone technology to Turkey. Only a small amount at the present time, but it's increasing, and the government would like to step it up. But it didn't need to be this way. The world didn't have to turn a blind eye to what's happening in Turkey, and the map of the Middle East could have looked very different if the Treaty of Sèvres back from 1920 had been implemented. This promised a free vote for the Kurdish people to determine their future, whether they wanted autonomy or whether they wanted their own state. Alas, the Treaty of Lausanne of 1923 made no mention of the Kurds. There were some vague language rights which were included in that. The Kurds were forgotten, they're not even mentioned in it, and almost immediately the language rights for the Kurds and other peoples of Turkey, non-Turkish people, were thrown aside, were violated. And ever since that time, the Kurds have faced monstrous oppression virtually alone. They've staged uprisings after uprisings. These have been drowned in blood. There's been a history in Turkey of physical and cultural genocide. In 1978, the PKK was formed. It launched armed struggle in 1984 after all other avenues had been blocked. So I'd say that the PKK is like the Belgian court has in so many words said, that it's a national liberation organisation of the kind of the African National Congress or the Southwest Africa People's Organisation in Namibia back before the apartheid era ended. And I think sometimes we should take a long view of history. In fact, we always should. And if we look at South Africa, I've mentioned those organisations that were once classified by Reagan and Thatcher as terrorists. Now it's almost 30 years after the fall of apartheid, and apartheid once seemed an impregnable fortress, blocking the road to freedom and democracy. Many of its leaders were in exile or in prison. Nelson Mandela, for instance, who was the venerated leader of millions of people in South Africa, predominantly, but not exclusively, Black and coloured South Africans, he spent 18 years in prison on Robben Island. And I think there's a real parallel there. The parallel is stark. Abdullah Öcalan, the acknowledged leader of millions of Kurds, is locked up on Imrali Island in the Sea of Marmara. He's now been 22 years behind bars, and the time has come for him to be released from that imprisonment. Thousands of Kurdish political prisoners, including Leyla Guven, who was the co-chair of the People's Democratic Party, have staged lengthy hunger strikes to demand his release. The PKK too has called many ceasefires. The most recent one was 2013 to 2015, in which they also negotiated with the Turkish state. So if the Turkish government says we don't negotiate with terrorists, we can say, but you did negotiate with the PKK before you stopped those negotiations, cut them off back in 2015. I'd make the point quickly that the PKK too has modified its original demands. It's for a separate state. They now would settle for autonomy. They want to negotiate precisely what a new state would look like, what the rights would be for Kurdish and other people within that state. And the negotiations must restart if there's to be peace in Turkey. Well, the world has preferred to look away, but I'd say that there are grounds for modest optimism today for the future for the Kurdish people. And I think one reason for that was the totally electrifying struggle of the Kurds of Rojava in Syria. The lifting of the siege of Kobani, that was a heroic struggle, and defeating ISIS. And this really put the Kurdish people on the map, and people today realise who the Kurds are. A lot of people had never heard of them. Today, I think we can say that millions of people around the world now know about the Kurds, and they're beginning to learn something of the oppression that the Kurdish people have endured. The struggle will continue. I'm not trying to say that everything's going to be over soon, because it won't be. The Turkish state is immensely powerful as far as the Middle East goes. It's the most powerful military force in the Middle East, bar Israel, I suppose. The Erdogan regime slips further into violence, corruption, and despotism. It's waging aggressive war in Syria, where it's guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. But I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for Erdogan and people like him to say to people around the world that the PKK is terrorist and that its leader, Abdullah Öcalan, is a terrorist. The Belgian court rulings show that change is possible, and we will keep up the pressure on the Australian government and raising at every twist and turn that we possibly can to raise the demand to lift the ban on the PKK and to release Abdullah Öcalan, and for the Turkish government to demand that they recommence negotiations. Well, I'd like to finish by looking back to the Black civil rights movement in the United States. And if people are, well, a lot of people won't be as old as me and they mightn't remember the song, but there was a song written at that time called Blowin' in the Wind. And I think the words of that song could have been written for the Kurds today. And I'll read just one stanza of it. How many years can a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea? And how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. That was John Tully. Thanks for joining us tonight. Our next speaker is Clare Baker, who has worked in the trade union movement in the UK for 20 years and has been involved in education and equality programs in the predecessor unions of Unite. Clare works in the International Department of Unite and coordinates the union's work with the global and European trade union federations in public services, construction and food, drink and agriculture sectors. Clare also coordinates the work of the Transatlantic Trade Union Workers Uniting that Unite is part of, with United Steelworkers of the USA and Canada and Los Miners of Mexico. Clare works on a number of union solidarity campaigns, including on Colombia and Palestine, and is the secretary to the trade union campaign Freedom of Öcalan. Clare was on the 2021 International Peace delegation to Imrali, and unfortunately she'll have to run before the end of tonight, but we're really glad to have you with us. So Clare, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to you all for inviting me on the meeting today. I'm very honoured to be here. As Sarah said, I'm going to speak to you today about the UK's trade union campaign for the Freedom of Öcalan, and also a little bit on our findings, which obviously Ögmundur is going to touch on as well, of the Imrali delegation that we both took part in. I'm going to try and show some slides at some point, so apologies if it all just goes completely to it. I'll just stop doing it if it doesn't work, but I just thought putting some pictures up of some of the work that we've done will illustrate well to you how well the campaign is doing. So the trade union movement, as you probably know, is a powerful and proud tradition of international solidarity with oppressed people around the world, from Palestine to Colombia, South Africa to Western Sahara. We advocate and we stand with people that have suffered in the fight for social justice, democracy and freedom. And the trade union movement was absolutely critical in making calls to release Nelson Mandela. And we are the largest civil society movement in the world, and we are uniquely placed to educate and mobilise millions of workers on progressive projects. This is important for all social justice campaigns, no matter what the country, and we're able to get out our message to huge audiences of people who would not normally know about the cause. So I'm just going to try and share my screen here just to illustrate our campaign. I hope you can all see that. So the Kurdish question and the situation facing the Kurds was always something that we in the trade union movement knew about, and solidarity had been there on and off throughout the years. However, the defining moment really for the start of this campaign was the battle for Kobani. In Unite, we watched and discussed as ISIS lay siege to Kobani and the actions of the Turkish state actively stopping Kurds living in Turkey from making the short journey to aid their friends, family and neighbours across the border. Later, as we all know, Turkey had gone further than this and was actively helping ISIS through the border and had supported and armed ISIS. So the campaign officially launched in the UK Parliament in 2016 by Unite Union and the GMB Union. And from there, we have grown to include 15 national trade unions, the TUC, which is our confederation, and the trade union law firm Thompson's. We are co-chaired by Unite the Union's Director for International, Simon Dubbins, and the Labour peer, Christine Blower, who used to be part of the Teachers' Union. We specifically have the two chairs, the man and the woman, in reflection of the Kurdish political movement to ensure that women are at the heart of political and social power. So central to our goals, obviously, is Öcalan and his freedom. The founding aims of the campaign are the immediate release of Abdullah Öcalan and all Kurdish political prisoners, the immediate end to the campaign of intimidation and violence against trade unionists in Turkey, opposition to the invasion of the free Kurdish cantons of Rojava and in northern Syria, and obviously Afrin, the withdrawal of Turkish and jihadi occupying forces from the free Kurdish cantons. For the trade union movement, Öcalan and his writings are reflective of our values: grassroots democracy, women's liberation, equality, ecology, are all things that we understand and all things that we are fighting for. And as time has gone on, we've seen these values reflected in Rojava, and it's something that truly inspires us. It has meant that our solidarity, as the case with many of our campaigns, it isn't really just one way. We've got a lot to learn as a movement from the co-chair system and from the women's revolution in Rojava. In the case of Öcalan himself, he is rarely in the media in the UK especially, and if he is, it will likely be with negative connotations. And through the trade union campaign, we can get to people through our education work, our events, our conferences, to tell people who Öcalan is, what he means, not just to the Kurds, but to all of us. The campaign's work has included a number of high profile and high impact events. The campaign was the international theme of the Durham Miners Gala in 2018. That's that top picture there. The Durham Miners is one of the oldest and largest working class events in the UK. It involves a march through the town of Durham and a huge rally with speeches from the political and the solidarity world at the end. And there's around 150 to 200,000 people that attend. So therefore, we're exposed to the campaign. And as you can see from this, the top photo there, that's the big rally. And you can see the big balloons with Öcalan's face on, and the big, there's a big picture of him floating down as well. Ibrahim Dugas, who is a prominent member of the Kurdish society in the UK, addressed the rally on behalf of the campaign, and many of the prominent speakers spoke of the need for Öcalan's release and solidarity with the Kurds. In 2018, the same year as this as well, we hosted an event at London City Hall, which is the seat of the London Mayor. The Turkish embassy itself tried to stop that event taking place. They put pressure on the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, to stop it, and they put pressure on the general secretaries of those 15 trade unions to try and stop it, obviously linking it to terrorism. All of the general secretaries wrote to the embassy to absolutely refuse to cancel that event, which went ahead anyway. And then the second largest working class event in the UK is the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, which is the picture below, where in 2019 the campaign was also the international theme. And again, we're exposing the campaign to working class people, to people who turn up who didn't actually know who Öcalan was, what the situation is facing the Kurds. So they were exposed to the Kurdish culture and obviously were able to support the campaign. That year too, we had an action at the TUC, our confederation's conference, where we got all of the delegation to the delegates who were attending to hold up pictures of Öcalan. Now, this is quite a simple action, seems quite easy and non-consequential, but the importance of it cannot be underestimated for the effect that it has on the trade union movement globally. The fact that the TUC, which is seen as pretty moderate, took part in this means that other federations of unions are going to feel comfortable and able to come on board with this campaign. And we've hosted a rally last year, for example. It was an online one where we had trade union representatives from across Europe, Spain, France, Italy. Also, Ögmundur took part in it as well, and South African trade union as well. So it is growing there, and actions like this make it become more part of the mainstream trade union world. As unions, we have relationships with Labour MPs, and through that, we've been able to advocate for Öcalan and the Kurds. And we've also taken a cross-party delegation to Rojava, so they can see firsthand the society there, as well as how vulnerable it is to countries such as Turkey. And in this picture here, you can see there's Lloyd Russell Moyle, sorry, get his name wrong. He's sitting at the very front there. And then there's a couple of actual Conservative MPs that we took there, which obviously is quite galling for us as trade unionists, but it's very, very important that it doesn't stay as a niche campaign within the left that it's actually broadened out, and that the Tories are in government in the UK. So to have them advocate for Öcalan, have them advocate for the Kurds is very, very important to us. So following this, the Labour MP, as you see here, Lord Russell Moore, has held a parliamentary inquiry in the UK into the situation facing the Kurds in Turkey, and included evidence from a variety of political, human rights defenders and civil society groups in Turkey, a number of which appeared before MPs to give evidence and answer questions. The report itself is nearly done, and it will be published soon, and it will be making recommendations to the UK government. So moving on to the Imrali delegation that took place this year, from the trade union world, myself and Baroness Christine Blower, our co-chair for the campaign, along with Ögmundur, along with some academics, lawyers, journalists, etc., took part in the Imrali delegation. Obviously, this time it was online due to COVID. The reoccurring theme throughout the meetings that took place has obviously been Öcalan's isolation. His isolation is against international and Turkish law, and is part of a systematic torture against this one man. But it also represents the isolation that Turkey is putting his ideas on Kurds, on women, on trade unions, teachers, journalists, opposition parties, and even the isolation of peace itself. And that the situation of oppression facing any of these groups in Turkey and beyond its border, where it's extending its aggression, is intrinsically linked to Öcalan's incarceration and isolation. As with previous Imrali delegations, we were honoured to meet with some fantastic organisations, and I will just concentrate here on, because I know that Ögmundur is going to deal with a lot of it, on the trade union organisation that we met, which was KESK, which is mostly a Kurdish trade union confederation, but it's very much of the left. The situation that faces the trade unions that face Öcalan and that face the Kurds in Turkey, as I said, are all intrinsically linked. And Erdogan is attacking all progressive forces in the country. And that war on Kurds has extended to a war on all who oppose him and who stand up for human and worker rights in the country. And we see that, Turkey now rates in the top 10 of the worst countries in the ITUC Global Rights Index. The oppressive political situation, along with obviously a deficient Turkish legal system, allows for private sector employers to sack workers for union activity and just basically pay off compensation instead of making them reinstate those workers. And employers in Turkey frequently fire workers if they try to organise in a union. And they basically are able to create an environment of fear and intimidation in the workplace to curtail any workers organising at all. And this is most prevalent when workers are trying to organise within the independent trade union federations of DISC and KESK. Those two federations do not have links with the AKP party or with any of the companies. So they're fully independent, and they're the ones that are getting targeted the most. And, I take my job pretty much for granted. I live in a relatively free, you could argue that, but relatively free country. We all go about our trade union activities quite freely. And it's always surprising to me and amazing to me to meet trade unionists, from Colombia, etc., who put their lives on the line just to do the job that I just get up and do every single day. And it's no different for those trade unionists in Turkey. They display real bravery by continuing just to defend workers' rights and also to campaign for peace. And the reports given to the Imrali delegation shows that unions are continuing to face their repression, violence and intimidation. So defending those rights it comes with extraordinary risks. And in fact, many trade unionists that I deal with and any of my colleagues deal with in Turkey most of those are under investigation, have ongoing investigations against them by the state, and will likely face trial. The trade union representative that the Raleigh delegation spoke with from KESK highlighted the reoccurring theme that we heard throughout the delegation, that international organisations and the international community have not done enough against, or taken sufficient stance against, the human rights violations in Turkey. The pro-Erdogan stances of many countries were highlighted, especially that of Germany, of the UK and of the US. And what that means in terms of addressing human rights situation in Turkey. Decisions to support, for example, the rights and freedoms of Kurds, of trade unionists, of journalists, of women, teachers, etc., aren't taken by like the European Union, for example, or decisions to actively oppose any of the expansionist or aggressive foreign policy of Turkey are not taken, because the economic interests of their relationship with Turkey takes precedent. Not just the economic interest, but also the fact that European Union, the UK, are basically being blackmailed by Erdogan with the huge numbers of refugees that are in Turkey from the Syrian conflict. And he's using them in order to say, do what I want, or I will let the refugees go. And the governments in the EU and the UK governments are so afraid of this that they basically capitulate to anything that Erdogan wants. You see, the EU will be quick to act on abuses of human and worker rights, say in Myanmar or in Belarus, that we've seen recently. And that's true of the trade union movement as well. But that's where there is a less geopolitical or an economic complication. Their reaction to a similar situation happening in Turkey is absolutely muted. The delegation meetings also showed that Turkey will link any organisation that opposes the AKP party or does not fall into their ultra-nationalistic policies with terrorism. These organisations are then criminalised and banned. And we are obviously seeing that happening at the moment with the HDP and a variety of Kurdish organisations right now. And we're seeing that seeping into wider civil society. So it's a very deep concern as well for the trade union movement there. And this argument to accuse any opposing group of terrorism gives governments like in the UK, who economically desperately want to trade with Turkey, who want Turkey to keep refugees off their shores, and who want to militarily align with Turkey in the region, a good excuse to hide behind when challenged over Turkey's human and worker rights abuses. They just fall into Turkey's protecting itself against terrorism. So we see the HDP linked with terrorism. We see independent trade unions, women organisations, human rights groups, anyone speaking out in favour of peace or against policies of the government linked to terrorism. And companies take their cue from governments of which their businesses, of the countries of which their businesses are situated in. In Turkey, pitting groups of workers against each other is widespread, obviously seen with the Kurds, etc. And companies will take their cues from that. And we are frequently seeing independent trade unions busted by yellow, company-aligned unions. And so they, if they every time they try to organise, they're sacked or arrested, and a yellow union is put in place. But no multinational is preventing the persecution of trade unions in Turkey or of trade unionists. In fact, they are opportunistically using it to their own advantage. So the situation that faces trade unions, that faces Öcalan, and that face the Kurds in Turkey, as I said before, they're all intrinsically linked. Progressive forces in the country are under attack. The war on Kurds, the isolation of Öcalan and his ideas has extended to the isolation and war on all who oppose Erdogan and all who stand up for human, civil and worker rights in the country. And, as a campaign, we cannot campaign for the human rights of Kurds without campaigning for the rights of trade unionists, for free civil society in the country, and for Öcalan's freedom, and vice versa. So the campaign for Öcalan's freedom, the trade union campaign, is important to us because his freedom is key for peace in the region, for the rights of all minorities in the region, of women in the region, of worker rights. And it's important for us and how that spreads out into countries. So, you know, in the UK through trade deals and stuff, it's important that Turkey upholds its human, worker and civil rights, and Öcalan is key to that. So the campaign itself has come a long way in a relatively short period of time, and we are proud of the work that we have achieved and the exposure that we've managed to achieve for the situation facing the Kurds and their extraordinary social and political structure that they have achieved in the areas of Kurdistan, and of course for Öcalan. But obviously there is a long way to go. We need to be able to expand this into trade union movement across the globe, into North America, into Australia, which would be amazing, and across the European Union. So yeah, a long way to go. But I think, you know, in that short space of time, we've achieved quite a lot. So thanks very much for having me. I hope that was okay, a quick run through of everything that we've been dealing with recently. And I apologise that I have to leave quite quickly. But obviously, if anyone wants to contact me about the campaign, then, you know, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Claire. And we have a couple of comments in the YouTube just saying it's important to be eclectic. Many self-identified conservatives are sympathetic to the Kurdish struggle. And yeah, inspiring to hear about union solidarity in Britain, and it would be a huge step forward to achieve in Australia, even a small fraction of what you've done in Britain. So thanks so much again for joining us. Our next speaker is Ögmundur Jonasson, who was born in Iceland in 1948. He's an historian from the University of Edinburgh, was an editor of the foreign news at Icelandic State TV, until he became chairman of the Federation of State and Municipal Employees in Iceland from 1988 to 2009. Recently, he has sat on the executive board of Nordic, European and international trade union organisations, including the PSI, the Public Services International. He was a member of the Icelandic Parliament from 1995 to 2016 and was Minister of Health, Justice and Minister of Interior in the Icelandic government in the period of 2009 to 2013. From 2013 to 2016, he was chairman of the Constitutional and Supervisory Committee of the Parliament of Iceland, and at present is a member of the European Commission Against Race and Intolerance, an honorary associate of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Ögmundur is on the advisory board of the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy in Berlin, and most of his working life, he's been a part-time lecturer in history at the University of Iceland and is a prolific writer and commentator. He is a spokesperson for the International Initiative Freedom for Abdullah Öcalan, Peace in Kurdistan, and also attended a number of peace delegations to Imrali. So thank you so much, Ögmundur, for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And before Clare Baker leaves, I want to pay special tribute to the work of the British unions and the work of Clare Baker, Simon Dubbins, and the people who have led this campaign. And as Clare Baker said, it seems a simple thing to have everybody at a TUC conference lift up a portrait of Abdullah Öcalan. But we all know it's no simple thing. It requires a lot of work to get the grassroots alive. And as John Tully reminded us in his very informative and inspirational talk, when Joan Baez, I think it was, who sang Blowing in the Wind, were getting tired of people turning their heads, pretending not to see. In Britain, in the trade unions, they certainly do not pretend they don't see, but I hope the wind will carry their message throughout the world. And this is why I'm happy to be at this seminar. Thank you very much for inviting me. Clare Baker, my colleague, has already given an overview of our visit in February. We call it the Imrali delegation. This is the fourth such delegation I take part in, the first in 2018. This last one, of course, being virtual due to COVID circumstances. But on all these visits, I have been told that the situation is getting worse. And it has never been as bad as it is now. And this last delegation was no exception in this respect, because almost all our interlocutors told us this. The situation is getting worse, and they gave us examples of trade unions being persecuted and imprisoned, journalists being persecuted and imprisoned, human rights campaigners, of course, politicians, members of parliament, HDP members of parliament in prison. We know that the co-chairs of the HDP have been in prison since 2016. Selahattin Demirtas and Fitchen Yüksekday, I'm not very good at pronunciations, but they've been in prison since 2016. And then persecution against women. This is getting worse. So what is it? How do we come to this conclusion after the great campaign against the Kurds, devastating campaign against the Kurds in the years 2015 and 16, where villages, towns were leveled to the ground, people killed? How is it, why is it that people are saying this, that the situation is getting worse? Now, one of our interlocutors said that what we are experiencing in Turkey is a regime of impunity, a regime of impunity. Now, what does that mean? It means that whatever the regime does, whatever the authorities do, there are no consequences. They can do whatever they like without consequences, domestically and internationally. And it is this which is getting worse. A regime of impunity is getting more entrenched, which means that the erosion of human rights can go ahead. And the prisons are getting more brutal. If we take women, the attack on women, Turkey recently withdrew from the Istanbul Convention. What is the Istanbul Convention? The Istanbul Convention is a convention protecting women against violence in the home and in society at large. They withdrew from that without any consequences. Another example of what they have done without any consequences internationally, when they leveled the ancient city of Sur within Ahmed, Diyarbakir. This is one of the seats of civilization with thousands of history. It's a UN heritage site. They destroyed 75% of it. Have you heard any word of this? Has there been any discussion internationally on this? Very little, indeed. So they can withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. They can destroy heritage sites declared by the United Nations without any consequences. The Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg came to the conclusion in 2020, last year, that Selahattin Demirtas the co-chair of the ATP, should be released. The response of the Turkish authorities was that this they certainly would not do. It was meaningless. Demirtas was a terrorist. What is the response of the international community? None. It's none. So what we are experiencing now, and what we found out on our visit now, was that, as I say, the conditions in the prisons are getting worse. John Tully mentioned Leila Guven, who organized or spearheaded the hunger strike in 2018-19. She has started a new campaign, which has been going on for almost half a year. It's rotating, so it's sort of there are new groups coming to the hunger strike and others receding while new groups are coming in, but this could lead to something like we experienced in 2018, 2019, where several people died. Thousands of people took part in this. And what Leila Guven told us when we visited her at her bedside in 2018, she said, "We are not committing suicide. We don't want to die, but we want to live with dignity. We want to live with dignity." And I will also recite a letter coming from Ocalan, the few days or few minutes that his prison cell was opened. A window to his prison cell was opened in 2019, and then it had been closed. It had been closed to any contact with his political friends since 2015. 2015, it was closed, and then for a few visits, he could send a message to the world, and I will read the first lines of this message. "There is a need for a deep social reconciliation in this historic process we are experiencing. There is an urgent need for a method of democratic negotiations, away from all kinds of polarization and the culture of conflict in the solution of problems. We can solve the problems in Turkey and even in the region, first and foremost the war, with soft power. That is with intelligence, political and cultural power, instead of tools of physical violence." And then later in the letter he says, "In Imrali, we have the determination to continue what we expressed in 2013 Nevros Declaration by further deepening and clarifying it. For us, a dignified peace and democratic political solution is essential." Now, these words are being imprisoned on Imrali Island. These are the words that Turkey doesn't want the world to hear. And I think it is right what John Tully said in his talk, that Abdullah Öcalan is giving us something new. You know, it's not only that we should be supporting him, we should be receiving inspiration from the Kurds, from Abdullah Öcalan, about democracy, about women's rights, about ecology. And as John Tully so rightly said, that Abdullah Öcalan is a living symbol for this. He's a living symbol for this. So for us, it's also important that he be released, and so that the Kurds and the thoughts of Abdullah Öcalan can radicalize us. Now, a few words about turning a blind eye, turning away. Being quiet, just showing concern, is being implicit, is taking a stand with the atrocities of the Turkish authorities. NATO had a meeting on the 28th of July 2015, just before the Turkish authorities started their terror campaign. Stoltenberg, the General Secretary, came out of the meeting and said, Turkey has the full support of every NATO state, also Iceland, every NATO state. That's what he said. But since that time, some of the NATO states have been expressing concern. But I say, being quiet is being complicit, is showing support for what is taking place in Turkey. Now, when the window of Imrali prison was temporarily opened in May 2019, the CPT committee of the Council of Europe visited after the Kurds and we, the Imrali delegations, had been urging them to do so for a long time. They visited. They came out with a conclusion. And then other institutions of the Council of Europe endorsed that conclusion. And what did it say? It said that an overhaul of the detention system, not only on Imrali Island, but in Turkish prison, needed a complete overhaul. It was unacceptable, and this should be done without delay. How did the Turkish authorities respond to this? They deepened the isolation. They cut off all communication with Abdullah Öcalan. They cut off all communication with Abdullah Öcalan. And when the CPT visited Turkey again at the beginning of this year, in January this year, there was no sign that they had asked to visit Imrali Island again, and there was no sign of any indignation on their part that their recommendations were not heeded. And in addition to this, the president of the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, he actually visited Turkey last year, received honorary medals from Istanbul University, the very place where most academics have been imprisoned or persecuted or forced to leave office. He received a medal there, and he traveled to Anatolia, to southeastern Anatolia, to the city of Mardin, where the mayors had been ousted, and I can't remember what it's called, some proxy mayors been put in their place. He met with them. This is what we mean by a regime of impunity. So why can we, in what way can we do something important? Is this seminar important? Yes, it is. It's very important. It's important in two ways. To listen to you, to listen to John Tully, I found it very inspirational. It was very informative and very inspirational. To listen to Clare, what she was telling us about the work of the British trade unions, it fills our hearts with hope, mine at least. And so it inspires us, it keeps us alive, you know. But then again, we internationally can break the silence. We must break the silence. This is what they did in South Africa. I remember meeting Esa Musa. He was on the first Imrali delegation. And he was telling us about the fight against apartheid in South Africa. And he said, the most important part of our fight was getting over the threshold that we could do it, in the near future. So they invented this slogan, freedom in our lifetime. And once people started to believe this, that it could be done, it was done. And there is a great similarity between the condition of Nelson Mandela and Abdullah Öcalan. They were both imprisoned by a regime which labeled them as terrorists. They were kept in prison for, John Tully said, 18 years at Robben Island, and altogether 27 years, Nelson Mandela. But he was released due to a combination of struggle at home, the ANC struggle, partly armed, partly collective democratic, and by international pressure. And this is what is happening in Turkey, of course, in Kurdistan. And it's our work to inspire the international or work for the international side of it. So I'm getting very frustrated to follow the situation in Kurdistan. But always when I listen to my colleagues, when I listen to people in Kurdistan, I remember a man I'm going to finish on this note, I'm running out of time. But I remember listening to a man in Diyarbakir, a Kurd, who had been sacked from his office. And he said, don't worry about us. We will fight, we will not give up. But worry about yourselves. Worry about Europe. Worry about the world. Save it from the humility of silence. And that's our job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ögmundur. Great to have you with us tonight. We have one more speaker, and before I introduce him, just a reminder for those watching on YouTube, if you have any comments or questions, type them into the YouTube chat and we will have a chance for Q&A at the end. So our final speaker is Mansour Razagi, a Kurdish Australian freelance journalist and former construction, forestry, mining and electrical union organiser. And he's currently a senior coordinator at CBUS Super. So Mansour, thanks for joining us and we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me. This is humbly, really, it is very is honor to attend such a seminar. It is part of the global resistance against tyranny, against fascism. It is very, very important that we continue such forums, and also we continue to link all the networks, all the forms of resistance. And with that one, CBUS has got nothing to do with that one. I have to declare rather than CBUS created by the union movement in Australia and construction union, and the workers on the ground, they went into strike to win these conditions and later become a universal scheme in Australia. And I'll come back to the union movement later. But at the beginning, me too, I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding our meetings on the traditional lands and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. This was and is and will be indigenous land always. I would also like to acknowledge all other cultures we have present tonight and today in the other part of the world. And just I want to say, as John mentioned as well, the Kurds, and I am, as a Kurds, we are the indigenous people in our lands who deprived our basic rights, our basic human rights by states in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. We are here today and talking about Abdullah Öcalan. Abdullah Öcalan is a leader for millions of Kurds. And in 1999, as everyone knows tonight, that he was abducted and he was kidnapped in the multi-state conspiracy. And since then, he's been in jail. This is inhuman and this is brutal sentence that has been imposed on him. And we cannot be silent. And 11 years of those, the first 11 years, he was alone in the whole big jail in Imrali Islands, and more than thousands security guard and military personnel were guarding the island. This is the situation. And as I said, we are indigenous people in our lands, deprived of our life. For thousands of years, the Kurdish people are living in one place, and we are the largest nation without any states. We are stateless, and we divided by the imperialistic powers between 4 countries, and our language, our culture, our way of life, and our existence has been denied. We are fighting for our existence. And I give you later on a couple of examples what's going on. Abdullah Öcalan was and is a leader and leading a fight full of honor to take back the rights of those people, the Kurdish people, that have been brutally stripped. And we are fighting for the self-determination rights, and he was leading this fight in Kurdistan of Turkey. And he was labeled as a terrorist, and many Kurds labeled as a terrorist, not just by Turkish states, by many other states in the region as well. We remember Saddam Hussein was labeled the Kurds as a terrorist as well. In Iran, the same. In Syria, the same. As we know, in the political arena, terrorism is a very fluid, has got a fluid nature of definition. And let's see who's the real terrorist. In Turkey, 4,000 villages have been wiped out, demolished. We've been treated as a second or third class citizen in all those countries. We subjected to genocide. 182,000 people vanished in 1988 during the Anfal operation run by Saddam Hussein. We have in Turkey a big dam called GAP, G-A-P. And I invite everyone go and search on the Google and see a couple of very valuable academic research on GAP Dam. What does it look like? One of them is led by as a thesis by the lady in UK. And have a look how is the Kurds is subjected actually for their existence are threatened by this dam. And the history shows that actually Saddam Hussein had the same plan and make Kurdistan in Kurdistan of Iraq or south of Kurdistan in a couple of different islands, separate people, and submerge thousands and hundreds of villages. This is the same apart. I'm talking about the internal aim of Turkish state in Turkey. Of course, the Turkish state has got an internal and regional aim and objective by creating and building this dam. But for the Kurdistan, this is what we are talking about. This is not and also it has got a ecological disaster and people losing their existence, their culture, their history. We got a 7,000 years village discovered in that region. We have been facing political arrest, being politically in prisons, tortures, and executions is a widespread, to the Kurds. And Abdullah Öcalan was leading the fight against these tyrannies. And we have seen later on in Rojava, when the ISIS came to power, created by, of course, who? The Western powers, secretly, who knows, at least someone, referring to some admissions by who we know, and Clinton. And also, it is very, very obvious and documented that the Turkish government funded ISIS, supported ISIS, opened the roads for ISIS to go and join other criminals in Rojava, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all these Western powers, links and hands to hands, supported this government, blindfolded their own nations, the taxpayers, their funds, their funding to those governments and that states. Who is terrorist? We or them? Kurds lost a lot under armed struggle. I was a freedom fighter myself in 80s, nearly 9 years I was in the mountain. I know if there is a democratic process, democratic environment, any nations, any struggle, we gain under democratic process much more rather than to take arm and flee to the mountains. But the self-defense is a basic human rights. When nothing left for us, let's take up the arm. What we can do? Years after years, decades after decades, more than centuries, they come and kill us, they come and destroy us, they denied our basic human rights, and we are fighting for our existence. And this is what Abdullah Öcalan did. That's why this is an international criminal act to abduct him, kidnap him, and put him in prison in very brutal, barbaric situation. I want to give you some examples in my personal perspective as a Kurd. I'm not talking about bloodshed. I'm not talking about torture. I'm not talking about executions. I'm talking about a couple of basic things that, to give you another perspective, what we are suffering from. I want to put it on a public arena. I'm a Kurdish from Iran, and my wife is a Kurdish from Iraq. I'm not in belief of capitalist notion of marriage, but do you know, for the past 32 years, our marriage never been recognized by anyone. We do not have a piece of paper to prove. Just because Kurds, alongside each border, they are not allowed to marry each other. And our daughter does not have any birth certificate, the first daughter. And in 2003, after so many years, we decided to go back to Kurdistan of Iraq after Saddam Hussein collapsed. No, of course, no airport. So we went through Turkey. On the way back, I had one Kurdish magazine. The police on the border searched all our belongings. They found that magazine. And he asked, "What is this?" And I mentioned the name, the forbidden name, Kurdish, and says, "This is a Kurdish magazine." He took us inside. My wife, my kids in front of us. He humiliated us. He taunted us. He swore at us. And he took us to the wall, and it was a global map. And he told us, show me Kurdistan. Where's Kurdistan? And of course I couldn't show. So he forced all of us each, even my 10 years old daughter, to repeat 20 times each, there's a no Kurds, there's a no Kurdistan. This is a kind of humiliation every day the Kurdish people are facing under these states. And Abdullah Öcalan phrased and led the fight against this fascist state of Turkey. But what's they going to do? This is a historical dialectic that this is inevitable, that the people struggle, they can create their own leaders. Time after time, they cannot. We have experienced so many different kinds of death, but we never died on our knees. And they cannot kill us. They cannot defeat us by killing and torture and also imprison of the leaders. So he must be released. He must be released immediately and unconditionally. But what we can do? The speakers before me really greatly, they mentioned a couple of things, and it is important. And it is important always, this is a science of dialectic, that internal matters is more important in any changes. We must rely on our people. But of course, on the other hand, international solidarity and this fight in the international level, on the diplomatic level and other level, it is very, very important. And we must rely on the grassroots movement. We must rely on the workers' movement. We must rely on the solidarity of the oppressed and suppressed people all around the world. In 2019, I was in the national conference of CFMEU Construction Division in Adelaide. And I brought up Rojava. And one of the delegates, the officials, he just came back from Turkey under very serious security threats, and they were holding a seminar, and also it was supported by everyone in that conference. They supported Rojava anonymously, and it was very, very important. It is resonated all around the world, that support. And the union movement in any countries with a grassroots union, trade union movement, I challenge anyone to see any achievement made in that society, the achievement made without the union movement. Any achievement. Have a look at the health, educations, annual leaves, sick leaves, anything you name it. The trade union movement is behind that. Plus international solidarity and also supporting oppressed people. South Africa, we know that in Australia, how the trades union played a major role in South Africa struggle and release of Nelson Mandela. We know that. We must rely on that movement and move forward to ask for the immediate release of Abdullah Öcalan as well. It is very important, and we are lucky that we have the support of union movement. It is important we link all these networks that we have created, seminars like this, different individuals, different committees, different subcommittees and organizations all the world and make an international organized struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mansour. Thanks for speaking tonight. So reminder that we do have some time now for discussion, and thanks again to all our speakers and to Claire, who unfortunately had to run off. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat on YouTube, and we've had one question so far. And any of the speakers are welcome to respond. Just feel free to unmute yourself. But a question from Susan: the ACTU Congress, so the Australian Council of Trade Union Congress, is coming up in the middle of this year. How can we work towards holding an event at the Congress or a motion of solidarity? And how can we draw unionists together to work on this? Would any of our speakers like to comment on that one?
I'd like to comment on that one. At least this is a Australian issue close to home. Look, I'm in touch with some other unions and also trying to do something. And the ex-official or current official MUA moved to some international solidarity body as well. I believe we can do great things. And also in October, it will be again national conference for CFMU Construction Division in Tassie, and we can and also we can expand our presence in all those national conferences, and we can go around actively. We can create a committee, a representative across Australia and in the different states, and state by state, we can go and approach the unions and also seek their support and also ask for our presence in the national conferences and link all these efforts together and make a one body efforts, and also bring all the unions movement and ACTU on as an umbrella group to do in under one banner to support our struggle. We need to do we need to have a plan and also get together and plan state by state and union by union and be in touch together.
Absolutely, well said. Thanks, Mansour. John or Ögmundur, would either of you like to comment? John, you just need to I might be able to unmute you. There we go.
Sorry, I'm technologically incompetent.
That's okay.
And this is a learning experience for me in more than one way, I should add, listening to our international speakers. But yes, I think it's absolutely crucial to get the unions organised to support this campaign. And I was really inspired by what Clare and Ögmundur had to say about that, about what is possible. And I think we can do the same here. I think about 3 years ago, we had 2 conferences sponsored by my university, and the international officer of the ACTU actually spoke at one of those. And the current international officer has also spoken at rallies in Melbourne. My union officials, the General Secretary, the former General Secretary, and the current General Secretary on side. So I will be doing all I can via my union to see what we can do about getting something up at the ACTU. If it's not too late to get a motion up, I'm not sure of the mechanics of that, but certainly to see if we can get some sort of stall, some sort of fringe event going at the time. I think we really should get stuck into that in a big way. And as Mansour says, I'm sure the construction union, the MUA and other unions will be on side with us as far as that goes. So yes, thanks.
Thanks, John.
Sarah, may I add something, please?
Oh, yep, go for it, and then we'll go to Ögmundur. Yep, Mansour.
Very quick. I know the role of academics and also intellectual is very, very important, and I'm involved with the Penn Sydney as well. and we can do something, especially they've got a subcommittee supporting writers in jail, in prison, so we can do something with them as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Ögmundur, we'll go to you.
Yes, now I know nothing about the trade union movement in Australia, but my feeling is that in most parts of the world, the political spectrum has been moved all too much to the right. The political left is nothing to be compared with the time Joan Baez sang her song. And the same has happened in the trade union movement internationally. That's my feeling. This is why the feat of the British trade union is so great. Now, what happened, as I see it, as an outsider indeed from the UK, there were several individuals who started this. People like Simon Dobbins, who has been very, very energetic, Clare Baker, and many more, of course, but a few people. And they started to work bottom up, not top to bottom, bottom up, the grassroots. That is because if you try to start internationally in a day when the trade union movement politics is, well, I'm seeking the word, shall we say, if we want to be polite, is more hesitant than it was before, or conservative, or non-radical than it was before. What we must do is to start from bottom, from upwards, but I don't know. I don't know the Australian trade union movement, how it is thinking internationally, but I mean, you were referring to Syria, what was happening in Syria, in Turkey, and the whole world. I mean, Mansour said the entire nations have been blindfolded. I think that's very correct way of putting it. But this applies also to big parts of the trade union movement. It also does. So we must analyze the movements. You know, we must find, you know, how to start. I saw from the video that there is a campaign going in Australia. Could you probably tell us a little bit more about that so we understand the situation? And then in one little sentence, Mansour, it was a great story. This personal story you told us is very, very powerful. I think very symbolic, very powerful. Could you just tell us, where was this? You were stopped.
And so I'll come back to you.
Sorry, can I talk?
Yeah, back to you. Yep, go for it.
I went to the city of Suleimania in Kurdistan of Iraq, or South Kurdistan. I was coming back on the border line where called Ibrahim Khalil, and I was passing that border when I was stopped. The first checkpoints.
Thanks, Mansour. And either John or Mansour, did you want to comment on some of the campaigning happening in Australia already in terms of Kurdish solidarity?
I'd just like to comment on Ögmundur's his remarks about how the trade unions have moved rightwards in recent years, and I think that's certainly the case to some degree in Australia. Certainly the trade union movement's much weaker than it's been in the past. We were once one of the most highly unionised workforces on earth. Something after the Second World War, something like 65% of the workforce was unionised. Today it's down to below 20%. And if you take out the public sector unions, it's even below that in most private enterprise. However, you know, there are some really important changes, I think, that are occurring. For the first time, the president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions and the secretary, these are the highest national officials, both of them are women, and both of them are left-wing women. And I think there's no reason, earthly reason, why what Clare's been doing shouldn't inspire them. And I think more than that, Ögmundur was talking about what we can do, how we're inspired by the Kurds, and certainly by Abdullah Öcalan's ideas on the liberation of women. I think this will speak directly to those women and to all those other women. So it seems to me it's something we can step up our trade union work. We've done a little bit here and there, but I think we need to do a more concerted campaign. And I think, bearing in mind what Clare has been able to do in Britain, I think that's the sort of thing we should aspire to, and we should think we can do it. I think that's an important point that Ögmundur made, that the South Africans said we can do that. Well, we can do something here, and I think that's possible for us to do it.
Great, thanks, John. Haval, you've got a question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and to the guest, Mr. Ögmundur, Professor John Tully, Mansour, and Claire. Thank you so much. It has been amazing and wonderful night, really. I have, my apologies, I'm going to go a bit details. Ögmundur remind me something very important, as based off his experience and political arena in Europe. That is correct to say it, world going through toward the right, and that's exactly what it is. But if I could go through background from Kurdistan division until now, entire spectrum, entire political, entire judiciary against the Kurdish leaders, against political activists, has been political, not based on their constitution law. Salahuddin Demirtas is a good case, Mr. Öcalan, and thousand HDP and mayors. You know, there is Turkey bonded to international law and to the European Convention. Mr. Ögmundur may have to, is a breach of entire this law. From Lausanne Agreement, as we look at it, they betray the Kurds, they bring it, they say that Kurds also have a representation, and clearly hidden from history. Basically, looking today, the Turkish state entire history based on foundation, based on denial of the Kurds. So my question to our guest and our speakers is, looking to entire world going to right, looking the activity, amazing activity that trade union, that our Act Solidarity campaign doing, and also our, if I could also bring that one, a lot of our friends and guests know, as Solidarity Group in South Africa put 1,000 campaign for United Nations for Mr. Öcalan campaign. My question is, looking at all this spectrum, what would be most effective to, because the most effective is a public, is an ordinary world community, ordinary people. And it means it has been for centuries hidden the Kurds from all, for example, Mr. Öcalan ideology, philosophy. His solution to world problem as a third alternative is not known to world. So my question to if I could ask Mr. Ögmundur would answer, and Professor John Tully and all other guests, what would be best, most effective? I'm sure our Solidarity Group doing a lot of things beside campaign, but how we can go a little bit lane to right and get ordinary people on board, and what is really Mr. Öcalan is, and how he been betrayed, and how Kurdish people been in this kind of constant by oppressive regime under genocide. Thank you.
Thanks, Haval. John or Ögmundur, would you like to respond?
Well, one point mentioned by John Tully is extremely important, I think. That was when the decision of the Belgian Supreme Court, was it at the beginning of last year? Or it was, yeah, I think it was at the beginning of last year or end of 2019, I can't remember. But
January.
They came to the conclusion that PKK should not be seen as a terrorist organization. This is the tool which is used everywhere. Palestine, Kurdistan, everywhere. To brand an organization as terrorist. Everybody who helps that organization is a terrorist or contributing or encouraging terrorism. We are terrorists here. In Australia, we could be branded as terrorists because we are taking part in a webinar supporting the Kurdish struggle, supporting Abdullah Öcalan, saying some nice words about PKK, understanding their struggle, supporting their struggle. We are terrorists. So breaking this link between the Kurdish struggle and terrorism is of extreme importance, And I think that should be a little special campaign on its own, to highlight this, to highlight the verdict of the Belgian court. They, of course, the Belgian authorities, of course, tried to belittle this as much as they could, soon afterwards. But they couldn't change the verdict. It is there, and I just want to call attention to this important, very important point, and we should pressure our governments to look into this as well, because this is very important again. And then in all fields, people who are working in conservation, take up the destruction of Sur. Why is the world not reacting to this? Call attention to the findings of the People's Permanent Tribunal in Paris. This is the tribunal of Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre, condemning or looking into Vietnam and dictatorships in Latin America. Forwarding that or bringing light to that verdict, which is important, stimulate such discussion. And as you have been saying, that the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan and how they have been changed over the years with emphasis on women, saying that there will be no freedom without the liberation of women. I mean, when I came to, I visited Kurdistan in 2014, and it was a great inspiration to me to see how these ideas, these words, had actually been put into practice. Of course, we know Kurdish society, like all societies, have different people and different traditions, but there is a line here which is important to all of us: the importance of equal rights between the genders, ecology, democracy, the lessons we all can take from the Kurds. I mean, this is what we should be doing.
Yes, look, I completely agree with that. I think it is central that we do hit this ridiculous thing on the head that the PKK is terrorist. I think it's absolutely essential. And that Belgian court thing is so crucial. I think that's the sort of thing that we have to get across, because in Australia, it's not so many years ago, as our Kurdish friends would know, that there were dawn raids with dogs and everything else on Kurdish halls around the countryside. That's what's happened in this country. not so very long ago. And unfortunately, there has been this sort of false consciousness in Australia that Turkey is a wonderful place, and part of it goes back to the war, First World War with Gallipoli, and there's this myth of our gallant enemy Johnny Turk, and that Kemal Ataturk was such a wonderful person. He did so much. He secularized the country, etc., etc. And the Kurds were forgotten. And when Kurds were talked about in this country, it was that they were all terrorists, and the PKK was terrorist. And this is something we really have to fight against. And I think one of the most important things that we've been doing in Australia is we have run a campaign to lift the ban on the PKK, and we've made submissions. I'm not quite sure the next time when it comes up in the Parliament to be debated, but last time they were much better than they've been in the past. They did acknowledge the fact that the PKK, that Abdullah Öcalan, etc., are very important for the Kurdish Australian people. And I think we've got to keep hammering away at that. And of course, linked to that is that Abdullah Öcalan has to be released from prison. So I think that's something that we really have to focus on. The other thing is, I think Ögmundur is absolutely correct to say that we can say to the Australian people, look, the Kurds in Rojava, look what they've done. Even despite the fact that they've been involved in a dreadful war against firstly ISIS, and then secondly invaded by the Turks, but nevertheless in a third world country with traditional patriarchal structures, etc., they've been able to do so much for women's liberation. Unfortunately, one of the things in Australia, and I think around the world, is that some people on the left don't understand just how important the Kurdish struggle is and what the Kurds have done. One particular person who I won't name in Australia, a leader of a left group, he actually said that, oh, those Kurds, they haven't done anything much more than has been done for women in Australia. Well, he was so wrong on that because they've gone so much further and than that. But even if they only had done as much as has been done for women in this country in such a strongly traditional patriarchal society, that would be amazing in itself. But they've transcended that. They've gone much further than that. It's really something that inspires me, just what the Kurds have been able to do in Rojava and in Turkey for women's liberation. So that's something we should really say to the Australian people, more to Australian women, just look at this, because very recently we've had some horrible revelations of things that have been going on in the federal parliament. So, Ögmundur, you might have heard of these, rape allegations against MPs, sexual assault, harassment, etc., etc. It's a big scandal in this country. So the Kurds they're way ahead on those questions than in this country. The other thing is ecology, and the ecological crisis, as we all know, facing the world is absolutely horrendous. It could mean the end of civilization as we know it, or maybe we can go on to a more civilized world. But ecology, multiculturalism too, is something that in such a ethnically diverse area as Rojava, as those regions that the Kurds have been able to show us the way forward. So I think we've got to say these are the positives, and at the same time, really push on release Abdullah Öcalan and hit this thing on the head once and for all that the PKK is a terrorist organisation. We should really broadcast that Belgian court decision as much as we possibly can, because that is the equivalent of the High Court in this country. That would be a really major turnout if the High Court in this country made a decision along those lines. So I think they're the sort of things that we have been doing and we can continue to do.
Thanks, everyone. Neil's just commented in the YouTube thread that the last listing for the status of the PKK was August 2018, so it looks like it is coming up for discussion again in the next couple of months about the PKK being listed as a terrorist organisation, and my cat is also here to join the discussion. I just also wanted to share that whilst we've been having this discussion, I tried to share a image of Abdullah Öcalan on Facebook with the hashtag Free Ocalan, and Facebook has immediately flagged my post, deleted it, and said that I've been breaching community standards by promoting terrorism. So, like, this is the implications of it. You can't even share a flag or an image of Öcalan on Facebook. So I might just go to Peter. Peter's also you've been banned a couple of times on Facebook, Peter, for posting images from solidarity rallies in Australia. Peter just wanted to comment more on some of the actions that have been taken in Australia and where the movement's up to.
Yes, thanks for letting me speak for a bit. I wanted to respond to Ögmundur about the Australian campaign. Actually, I am under restriction from Facebook now, unable to update our Rojava Solidarity a Facebook page for the next 2 months because of a photograph, not a direct photograph of Abdullah Öcalan, but a photograph of a perfectly legal demonstration, and somebody in the demonstration was carrying a flag with the image of Abdullah Öcalan, and that's got me the latest 2-month ban. We have, since November last year, when the official campaign began, Ögmundur, we've been trying our best to run as much of a campaign as we can under conditions of the pandemic restrictions, and different states in our country have been in various stages of lockdown over this period. Nevertheless, we've had several demonstrations and rallies in several cities, and we've done a few stunts which have been got a glimpse of in the short video clip that was shown earlier. In Western Australia, a plane was hired to pull a sign, Free Öcalan, across the sky over the beaches of Perth. It probably surprised a few people, and maybe they asked, who is Öcalan? And that might start a conversation. There was a very successful car convoy through Sydney, which was a way of having a demonstration when there were COVID restrictions. And that was also quite successful. But much of the work we're doing is still building up the networks of support beyond a relatively thin layer of regular supporters outside some very well organized Kurdish communities in several cities in Australia. And they take the brunt, they take the load of the demonstrations. They mobilize people sometimes weekend after weekend, not just for the case to free Öcalan, but also in support of the campaign for women's rights, in support of the HDP, etc. And the pace of activity, I think, is exceptional. I don't think there is a single fundamentally refugee community in Australia that is as committed politically as this. Now, one of the very interesting things is that while we are at the early stage of getting formal union support, we have some individuals supporting us, and we are just slowly beginning to build networks of parliamentarians in several cities. They haven't yet formed official organizations to support the Kurdish struggle, but they are gathering, and we've organized a few functions for them in Parliament House now, so that we can, in various parliaments, so that we can try and get them to move forward. But there's still a certain hesitancy about Abdullah Öcalan and the PKK, as you said, because the PKK is formally listed as a terrorist organization. But there's a huge contradiction here. That's the formal position of our government, of our state, that this is a terrorist organization, but they know that the supporters of the PKK in this country are not terrorists. Their security agencies know that they're not terrorists. And recently, there was a court case, not quite as big as the Belgian court case, around a Kurdish journalist who was belatedly charged and accused of being a member of the PKK and of fighting. There's a particular security legislation here says, getting involved in a foreign armed struggle. And he was charged with that. He was convicted of being a member of the PKK, and he was found innocent of the charge of being a foreign fighter. But he managed to convince the judge over the course of a long trial of the correctness and of the struggle, that this was a democratic struggle. And she made total nonsense of the arguments that the PKK, that the Kurds in general who are fighting for freedom, were terrorists. We have yet to be able to use this amazing judgment, which is an education to read in itself, by Justice Lucy McCullum in a political way, as much as we should. And partly because we are constrained, we don't want to get our friend locked up in jail again. So we have to work out some of the tactics here. But potentially this is a huge contradiction, because you have a judge, a very respected judge, saying this is rubbish. These people have a genuine struggle, and their values are the democratic values that most people in Australia would support. And I think in the future, this means that we can build a movement that's much stronger and have a much stronger purchase. And I think we are hoping that one of the results of this seminar is that we can follow through and make the links directly between people like Clare and trade union leaders in this country to actually take a few institutional steps forward in building the movement. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Mansour, we'll go back to you for comment.
Yeah, thanks. Look, regarding the notion of terrorism, and also I believe we can have these fights in a different arenas as well. Two things. One, because since terrorism is become terrorism law has got to do a big implication in this country, and I'm gonna come back as well. So I'm talking about two arenas, legal and media. Media is very clear. We have got a reasonable good access to the social media as well, but we need to broaden our fights through the other mass media as well, the other form of mediums that I'm talking about. But I want to come back to in terms of the legal implication of that, the terrorism. In 2002, John Howard, rushed the terrorism law in March. I remember because I did a piece on that one when I was at university, UTS. And the center of terrorism law in Australia is the notion of violence, and is very vague definition, because it can be broadened to so many things. And this law, as much as target the real terrorism organization, it targets the progressive movement, trade union movement, and even some other states, some other government, overseas government can bring a legitimate movement in Australia to the court and also face the penalties under the terrorism law. So in this arena, we need to, I believe, to direct our fights, our struggle, our campaigns towards law society and also the legal department of the trade unions to help us to take this law and challenge this law because we are living in the kind of lawful society. We need to take this apart as well, fight the terrorism definition of terrorism, to remove the terrorism label on the PKK as well. This is very important to direct our fight in that arena and also media arena as well.
Thanks, Mansour. We've had a few more comments on Facebook. On YouTube, someone's referred to Facebook as Fashbook, which is accurate. And lots of thank yous to our speakers. People have really got a lot out of tonight. So I want to echo that too and say thank you to John, Ögmundur, Mansour and Claire. And we definitely hope that some of the examples that Claire has shared will lead the way for unions here in Australia to take action, and we've got a perfect opportunity to do that with our Congress coming up. As our speakers have noted, people all around the world, including trade unions, campaigned successfully for the freedom of Nelson Mandela during the anti-apartheid movement, and we have to do the same for Abdullah Öcalan. I also want to thank Alex Bainbridge from Green Left, who's been behind the scenes doing all the technical things with Zoom and YouTube to make tonight run smoothly. And thank you to all our viewers who've joined us in the Zoom chat and on YouTube. And a reminder that if you haven't already, to please add your name to the international statement calling for freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. And you can do this by going to the website australiansforkurdistan.org. And hopefully that will get shared in the YouTube chat. Lastly, I'd also just like to draw your attention to another upcoming online forum hosted by Green Left titled Kurdish Solidarity in the Biden Era, which is on the 11th of May at 6:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And speakers include Marcel Cartier, who's a hip hop artist, journalist and co-editor of the Kurdish Media Project, and Steve Sweeney from Morningstar, international editor and founder of Journalists for Democracy in Turkey and Kurdistan. So thanks again to everyone, and we'll wrap it up there for tonight. But Ögmundur and to Claire, I really hope we can stay in contact and form some partnerships going forward. Thanks, everyone.